And their task is to really bring the gesture in, because when they extend to this length, they've gone a lot farther than I would. So we have our body architecture. We also have our personality, right? The world needs, and this is one beautiful thing about the body of Christ, we are all unique and have distinct personalities. And my personality is different than Randall Bradley's, is different than Reginald Wright's, and yet God uses all of us. And so we bring to the table our own personality, whether we be an introvert, an extrovert, or somewhere along that continuum. I also, as you can see, love the Enneagram. And so I think all of those things are useful. We also have this experience piece. And so let's not underestimate this. Anybody here have a formal life as a band conductor or a drum major? Anybody? Yes! Amazing. So that experience is something that you're going to bring to the table. Anyone a pianist? That experience is something that you bring to the table. A lot of times when I work with conductors who are pianists, the music comes through the elbows this way. And it makes a lot of sense, right? I was working with a conductor last week, and they were a euphonium player. And so there was sort of this sympathetic holding of the euphonium when they were conducting that. I thought, wow, what's going on here? And then I learned, oh, this person's at the euphonium. Okay, now this makes sense, because this is a position where they're creating art. We also just have our human experience, and good and bad, traumatic and healthy, all of the things that shape us into who we are. That's housed in our bodies, and we can't leave ourselves somewhere, right? And so these are things that are important, that really impact us as leaders, and then also just as conductors. Practice makes permanent. All right, so in my years of being a student and then also a teacher of conductors, when somebody comes in to get a graduate degree in conducting, they typically have what I call isms, right? And these isms are born of whatever their paradigm is. Oftentimes, if we don't hear something in the ensemble that we want to hear, it manifests in the body. And this is something to just be really mindful of. So if we don't hear rhythmic acuity, sometimes we get a sympathetic knee bob, right? Or if we want to hear more connection to the phrase, I'll see people talk. But these isms, whether or not we know, they're there and present. I'll never forget when I was working with a graduate student, she said, tell me why you do this when you're conducting. And I said, I don't do that. And then the next day in rehearsal, God was like, there it is, right? And it was a colloquialism that really had no purpose. There was no specific purpose or intention behind it. It was simply a habit. And so for us, we develop colloquialisms or habits or vernaculars, and the more that we do it, the more it becomes permanent. Now, if it's a good habit, that's great. We want that to be permanent. But oftentimes as conductors and gesticulators, it is not always something that we wish to keep. So when we conduct, and stop me anyone if you have questions or if you want to pursue any of these points further. But when we're talking about conducting and receiving from an ensemble, we sort of have three modes. The first one is listening. And listening mode is when we're giving the minimal amount of information, just enough, so that we can assess where our ensemble is. So listening mode, you're kind of staying out of the way. You're giving what they need, tempo, entrances, but you're not informing the musical end in a demonstrative way. Then we have teaching gesture. So teaching gesture might look like us engaging with a physical motion to help people sing through a phrase. Let's say that we're trying to get the ensemble not to breathe, so then we have them do this. And instead of just always doing a pattern in the rehearsal, I might do this with the ensemble. That's what we call teaching gesture. And then performance gesture is an amalgam of these two, where it's an economical version, so it's not so big, but we would then take some of the teaching gestures and fold it into our performance gesture, where we remind the students of that. And when I say students, please always translate it to your context. I don't lead at a church, and so for me, my students are my church choir, right? So video of yourself conducting and just been like, whoa, I had no idea I looked like that. I won't qualify it, like how good or maybe not great. But those are the things that we really want to be aware of. And if you're not occasionally recording yourself, I just want to encourage you to do it. It's just like studying voice. How many of you have been in a voice lesson and you walk out with a recording from that voice lesson? This might be from your time of study, and you go, is that really what my voice sounds like? Or even just a recording of your voice. It's so different, and it's because we hear it through this filter. Oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, there can be problems that manifest in our conducting that are a hindrance to our ensemble. What, if you were to guess, if a conductor wants to move a tempo forward, what do they do with a gesture often? Like, how do you move a tempo forward? How do we speed up? Exaggerate the beat is such a common choice. It gets bigger, right? So everybody just go ta, ta for me, ready, and go. Right. So what I'm doing is I'm quadrupling the geography that I must traverse, and it becomes much more difficult to follow when that's our impulse. The opposite is the practice that we want to utilize, which would be faster as a smaller gesture, because it's far more economical. I can get from this point to this point really quickly, as opposed to from this point to this point, right? I've made my work so much more difficult, and then I become frenetic. But our impulse is to make the gesture bigger because we want to be fluorescent. We want them to see us. But sometimes our over-functioning self-perpetuates a problem. So then we eventually become caricatures as opposed to distillations, as opposed to concentrations, as opposed to economical leadership. Does that all make sense? And so you can sort of think through what might be some of the propensities when we're not hearing something. What is our sort of tendency, and is that actually really helpful? Elements we long to hear but do not hear often manifest in the body in an unintended and sympathetic movement. Okay, I gave you a few examples of this, like a knee bobber, right, or someone tucking. How about a hitch? Does anybody know what a hitch is? When I use the word hitch, I don't mean something that we put on the back of our tractor trailer, right? What's a hitch in the gesture? Anybody know? You have a fabulous hitch. Can I have everybody just turn to this magnificent conductor? So it's a subdivision. So if let's all just, because 4 is our friend, let's all just conduct in a 4 pattern. And now we're going to add a hitch. And this hitch might be, it can be an equal subdivision, but a hitch is a hiccup and you're getting long, okay? That will often manifest if we want to hear rhythmic acuity, but don't. And actually what that does is that gets in the way. It diminishes the clarity of the tactus, and it is an example of us over-functioning to try to help, and then we actually create a problem that is perpetual. So it's a difficult thing. Teaching gesture can often become the norm. This means when we talk about teaching gesture is typically like an exaggerated version, something that is maybe like big, and our students become, or our musicians, our collaborative musicians become accustomed to that, and then it's this whole response thing, right? It's like child rearing. If we are asking our kid to do something, and the only time that we mean business is if we're yelling, then we teach that child, when they yell, they mean business. And then it demands that I yell in order to get something done, and I've created myself my own monster, right? So the same thing is true of our conducting. If we're always yelling with our conducting, then we teach them, that's when we respond, rather than insisting on sort of a boundary of subtlety, which then allows us to be more of a facilitator. And that's, I think, ultimately what we want when we think about, and when I think about the most transcendent musical experience back to the voice. It's a wind instrument, and we really want to generate a rooted, grounded breath. We live and die by the singer's breath, which we'll hear more about later this week with regard to how important breath is. But in general, to get this place, what I call the circle of breath, we're going to take and make sure our feet are about a shoulder width apart, and then take your arms just at your sides and just swing them freely and bring them right here. You're going to sort of be like if you have a tray and you're serving people. But this should be fairly in line with your belly button. So if you know where that is, that's sort of what we want. And then in terms of architecture, pit space is pretty important because this is a visual image of the breath. If I take and become a T-Rex, then I've all of a sudden cut the breath off. And what's amazing is you probably can feel the difference. If I asked everyone in here to sing, "Ah," and had open breath space, let's just sing, "Ah," everyone, and "Ah." Good. Now I'm going to adjust the conducting, and you sing it again. "Ah." Yeah, obviously you're a little informed by me setting it up in such a way, but if I had just come up here and conducted like this, I don't know that I would have inspired a very beautiful sound. So we want to make sure that we're hugging a beautiful tree and that the breath circle is in play. In general, this should be our default. Now, we will, how many of you conduct instruments regularly? Yeah? Okay. Or even at Christmas, Easter, when we have like high feast days in terms of the church calendar. But if we want to check our positioning in terms of body architecture and breath circle, we need a baton. And if you don't own a baton, I want to encourage you today to make that investment in yourself, buy a baton. But when I put a baton into my hand and the body architecture is in alignment, then the center of my body should be aligned with the tip of the baton when I come down. So I'll just do a little sort of lazy Susan action here. But when my arm is in the right position, the center of the baton aligns with the center of my body. If we wear a button-down shirt, it would be right in alignment with that. Now we've got, if you take your arm and swing your arm this way, this is what I'll call the vertical plane right here. And then we have our horizontal plane. Now we've already sort of found our navel. Where the horizontal plane and the vertical plane intersect with our body with pit space, that really should be where one falls. If one without a baton falls in the center of the body, and sometimes there are situational reasons musically to do that, but if it falls in the center of the body, we're creating a cutoff. And when I say cutoff, I don't mean a release of sound, I mean a barrier. What does this say to you if I say, "Oh, it's great to meet you"? I'm so glad want the tip of the baton to rest right there. And that's pretty important when we're talking about technique, to set that baton up here. Okay, does that all make sense, everybody? Okay, cool. I will bring us in, and I'd like for you to sing any vowel that you believe I am indicating with my hand shape. So I'm going to change my hand shape, and I'd love for you to respond with whichever vowel you think matches my hand shape. Whoops! Oh, goodness. Here we go. I'm turning into Cinderella. This has been quite an eventful 24 hours. Oh, I have to say, there were people in Grand Rapids yesterday who had been there for 3 days, so I was glad that I was not in that situation. All right, so here we go. I will bring you in. You just sing on a vowel, any vowel that you want. Okay, are you ready? Here's your first one. Good. Okay, here's another one. Oh, you agreed on a pitch? Okay, you ready for this one? All the trickies. Here you go. And okay, you ready for this one? Good. And now the ideal. Yes, good. You passed the test. Excellent. The vowel lives in the hand. The vowel lives in the hand. As our default, today we're talking a lot about blank canvas. We're talking about defaults. As a default, we want the vowel to live in the hand naturally. And the best way to find your natural hand shape is to do a handshake. So just, if you take your hand as if you're going to reach out and shake my hand, everybody, that's your natural hand shape. And sometimes we get into things where we do stuff like this. This was something that I did early on as a conductor. It was because one of my mentors did it. So sort of like by, what do we call that? It's osmosis. That I had taken that on. Just like I have a voice teacher who sang out of the corner of their mouth, and I started singing out of the corner of my mouth, right? We are wired, God hardwired us to mimic with mirror neurons. This is how we learn. It's an amazing thing, but it also can be dangerous. So the natural hand is what we would like. Now, when we're conducting, we'll talk about the decision, and I'm so sorry because I'm so discombobulated about time. Do we go until 30?
Yes, sure.
Good. Okay, we've got 15 minutes. I'll try to get to some music. But in general, we want this to be our default. And in particular moments, if we adjust from our default, it should have meaning. So if I like a chord to be sense of vibrato, and some of you might be like, girl, I just need a chord. I don't care what the flavor of vibrato is, I just want the chord to be right? But for those of us who are able to make those sort of discriminations, for me, one thing that I'll do is if I put the chord down, I'll take my hands and do this. I don't say anything to the students, I don't say take the vibrato out, but as soon as I do that, they respond, right? And so this is the power of the hand that we can give. And in general, I'm not a huge advocate of conducting with the fingers. This is a gesture that we, in my household, call pet the guinea pig. It's like if you had a cute little guinea pig or a bunny, and you just were doing that. That's what we call it. So don't pet the guinea pig as a default. There are some times that I might deliver information by fingertips, but in general, if I don't have a baton in my hands, my arm from the elbow is the baton. This is now my baton, and so we want to work with a pretty stable wrist. Okay, cool. So we talked a little bit about this issue of size. We're going to deal with it in terms of an axis of motion. So if you look at our bodies, they're incredibly proportioned. I think if you know Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, this drawing, I did a thing last month, and somebody brought me a very comical print where they were having auditions for Vitruvian Man, and so there were all sorts of misshapen people that had arms like down on the floor or legs that were too big, and of course then you see Vitruvian Man in this line, and Vitruvian Man in the print has 3 arms on each side, because in Da Vinci's drawing, he creates a series of circles from different points in the body and shows how the divisions of the body are all proportional. softer dynamic, then I stabilize these larger axes of motion, and I work from the smaller one. Does that make sense, everybody? Oh, great. I'm going to give you some things that you can practice, and just like anything, if we don't practice, we really don't change. And so if it feels a little self-indulgent, I just want to say to you, I license you to practice your conducting and to practice in front of a mirror and also recording yourself. So you can think about this in terms of engagement, that you might start and try to do maybe one bar with just your hand, and then make the travel even bigger, right? And now we're going to engage from the elbow, and now we're going to more fully engage, and now I'm going to move to the shoulder. And what's pretty important is that when I engage a larger axis of motion, I'm stabilizing the others. Otherwise, I am offering my collaborators multiple ictuses at all times, right? So if I keep all of these axes of motion in motion, then I have absolutely diffused any clarity. Now, so I'm going to do sort of both and. Without a baton, we really do work with a pretty stable wrist as a default. The elbow is our primary axis of motion. When we get to a bigger dynamic, we come here. When we put the baton in the hand, then the wrist must be plastic. The wrist must be fully engaged, okay? I'll just demonstrate to you the difference. There's no movement in my wrist right now. Now imagine that you're a violinist and you're trying to play a beautiful legato line, and this is what you're seeing, as opposed to sympathetic conducting. I'm sympathizing with the idiomatic needs of that instrument. So I'm thinking through that. So as soon as we bring the baton into the picture, then we engage the wrist. And the wrist then becomes the arbiter, the controller, the driver of articulation. That's where our articulation emerges, whether it's a staccato that has stop in the gesture, or it's legato and there's drag, where the baton tip goes. Do you see how the wrist leads there in the legato? Elizabeth Green is a very important teacher of conducting. All of her exercises are, actually I don't know that they're all online, but there is a really cool video of Elizabeth Green doing her conducting technical exercises. She must be 82 in the video. She was a pioneer. She's in this like 1980s amazing dress, and she's also 80, and she's doing these exercises. Watch those. It'll give you a place to start, and I'll give you some homework at the very end with some specific assignments. But if you find yourself less comfortable with a baton, I want to encourage you to embrace the opportunity. I didn't start conducting with a baton until I became a doctoral student, and I thought to myself, oh, I need to conduct a string quartet. I better start using a baton. That's wrong thinking, but that is what I thought. And so I just want to encourage you to think about this. Now, if we had more time, we would look at the Hagenberg, but I want to make sure I get to as much content as possible. Did Derek bring in the Elaine Hagenberg Olaf? Do you have that or no? We don't have, okay, great. Comedy of errors today. All right, now, how many of you have found when you're bringing an ensemble in that can be a really challenging moment in different situations, right? So as conductors, we make our money on the seams. Once we get the train out of the station, it's okay. But the seams, the divisions, the stops, the releases, the entry points, those are all the places where we really have to know what we're doing. Preparatory principle. This is a little recipe that I will give to you, and you can use it to evaluate where there might be a problem in your gesture. If you're not generating the result that you hope to generate, there might be a quality that you're hoping. Maybe you want a legato entry, and man, they are just slamming that entry, right? And so you can look at this I know you're just excited to return. So go through number 2, get to the apex of the rebound. When I change directions and change speed, it signals to you the new tempo. So, just could you da one more time? Da, da, da. So when I couple a change of speed with a change of direction, that signals to them. And what you must do is when you get to the apex of the beat, you can't do something like this. Slow, slow. See the difference? So I have to linger. I'm going the opposite direction. Now I'm going to change direction and change speed. Yeah, good. Yes! Oh, my friend. Yes! Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I believe, and my friend here is an amazing